Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of these guys right here. These are the Gerber Knives Flatiron. First off, actually, in the name of full disclosure, these guys were both provided to me for free by the manufacturer as review samples. I actually reached out to the designer. I said, hey, I kind of want to check out the Flatiron, because I went over to to Nalpac Group, which is a knife shop over there in San Diego area, and I handled one of these guys. I was like, wow, this is surprisingly good, right? For a $30 Gerber, okay, whatever. And so I wanted to spend some more time with him. So Gerber sent these guys along. But anyways, I told him, as always, I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. Might be a gem, it might be junk. They still sent it along. We do have to assume that these are the best quality controlled ones ever. And also we have to assume that I'm doing my best not to let that, or the fact that I've done a factory tour up there, although this was the American factory, these are not American knives. I'm trying not to let any of that affect the quality of my review. But there you go, full disclosure. Next thing, let's do some size comparison real quick. Here they are against, and actually I'll just use this guy here. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2. So you can see in terms of size-wise, it's actually not so far off the PM2. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. And here it is against your Spyderco Delica. So you can see here, this is not a small knife whatsoever. In fact, I would go so far as to say it is a reasonably large knife. And actually, let me go ahead and do a quick measurement on the blade here. If we put this guy up here, we can see that this comes in right over 3.5 inches. Credibly speaking, it's probably 3.5. But the thing is, if the cop doesn't like you, this is very easily going to be over 3.5 inches. So, do keep that one in mind. So this is actually a surprisingly large knife. And if we look at just the handle of this guy, we can see that it is about the same size overall as the Spyderco PM2, although a very different profile on it. So there you go. Next thing, this is a Chinese-made Gerber. They do have an American factory creating knives like the Fastball, but they also have the Chinese factories. And this is one of those that are made overseas. The designer on this guy, I'm told, was Seth Jeramis, who is their design lead. Actually a nice guy. There is no disassembly because the damn thing is thread locked completely shut. So let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting knife right here. So on the good side to start with, it actually has a reasonably nice blade. Although the steel isn't really up to par, it has a lot of other features that I do appreciate. It's a Wharncliffe style blade, and a Warney blade can actually be very helpful for cutting like this. Although it's also more than anything, it's kind of a razor cleavery style blade. Whatever it is, it's kind of weird, but it's got a fair amount of flatness to it. It has a little bit of belly, which allows for cutting onto surfaces a little bit more readily than something that is a straight out Wharncliffe. Pardon me. It actually has a hollow grind on it. If we take a look here, you can see that there is, I'll see if I can reflect something off of it. No, not really. It's, actually, there you go. There is a little tiny bit of hollowness to this grind, which helps to thin out that edge, and it actually comes down to a reasonably thin edge. It's not the end of it's not the start of any worlds, I suppose, but it actually thins out quite effectively down there, and I appreciate that very much. This is a tool that can actually cut things, and that's a beautiful thing. And even though the stock is a little thicker, because of that hollow grind, and because of the relatively tall blade, it does cut, and that's good. Next thing, clip on this guy. You know what? Initially, my thought was, wow, this is probably going to be an awful clip, but in practice, it kind of works. It's a very tight clip, is the one thing I can really say about it negatively. This clip is very tight. You can absolutely bend it back if you'd like, and in fact, I've done that before a little bit on this guy, but the thing is, because this knife is relatively tall, it's not going to fall out of your pocket, and so having this relatively small clip there actually works out okay, and these screws at the top here make it pretty easy to extract this guy from the pocket. I think it's a fine clip. Is it the world's best clip ever? No, not necessarily, but it does the trick. It works well, and the way that it's canted actually makes the knife carry a little bit better in the pocket than you might otherwise expect. So that's good. Next thing, the action on these guys is surprisingly good. These are running on phosphor bronze washers here, and in fact, I can flick these guys quite reliably. I'm putting a little bit of wrist into it, mostly because I am upside down. Well, I'm under a camera here, but you can see here, these do flick easily. And that is absolutely the best way to open this knife, is to flick it open. Certainly, there are times where you'll miss a flick, and the detent isn't so amazing, and I'm frankly not so skilled at the flicking anyway. Some people have better luck with the index or with the middle finger, but this is a very good knife for flicking. It flicks very, very well. and it's on phosphor bronze washes, and so as a result, the action is actually smoother than you might expect. So that's a beautiful thing. Next thing, the price on these guys is pretty good. We are looking at 35 bucks for the G10 model and about 30 bucks for the aluminum model. That's a very affordable price point. For 35 bucks, most people can afford to do that, and look, if you buy one and you don't love it, that's not such an expensive mistake. So as a result, I think that's a nice price point. I'm glad they were able to land there for it. And certainly, the other thing that's a little surprising is that it's actually decently made for 35 bucks. There's a tendency particularly among American-based companies who are working out of Chinese factories, to end up with a lot of really ugly cut corners. I mean, certainly, the steel is not amazing. We'll come back to that one later, rest assured. But the thing is, both of these guys are scented. In there. They're scented well. The action is good. They're smooth-ish. They're not the smoothest knife ever, but they're smooth-ish. The detent is strong enough. The edges on the top here are nicely rounded. It's got a reasonable stonewash on the blade. I have to say, the tumbling on these blades is actually quite good, and the grind on it comes down to a relatively thin edge. These are better made, actually, than a lot of your inexpensive $30 knives from American companies out there. Usually you can tell exactly where the factory was like, nope, we don't give a crap. And really here, the only issue is the steel. That's what, well, actually, I'm sorry, not the only issue, but that's the main issue here, is that the steel isn't great. But aside from that issue, these are pretty damn well done for 35 bucks. I'm happy about that. The next thing, and actually the final thing on the good side, is sort of a catch-all, but it covers a bunch of things, which is that this is a well-designed knife. What I mean by that is that there are knives that work. There are knives that are very functional, and there are knives that, you know, they'll do the job, right, where it's better than not having a knife. But then there are knives that are really well-designed. You can tell somebody who gives a damn about design was working on them, and this actually feels like that. Because you've got, for instance, a lot of little details here. So, for instance, you notice that the clip here stops before the lock bar over travel stop, and in fact, this over travel stop is angled such that it will allow you to better easily grab the clip here, the corner of the clip with your pocket. So, not only does it not interfere with that, but this is designed, or at least it sure looks like it was designed, to optimally get this guy into the pocket. That's a nice little detail there. That's something I appreciate. It has this lock bar over travel stop. The main function of this is to remove the ability for you to over push the lock bar, to spring the lock bar in this direction. And that's a good thing, I suppose. But actually, in practice, the other thing that it allows you to do is to grip the knife fully as you flick it. That way, you're not adding additional lock bar tension onto the lock bar here. You're not increasing the tent strength, because if I grab right here with my finger on the lock bar, I cannot possibly unlock this knife. I cannot possibly open this knife. But having that there gives me a place to rest my finger where it won't affect the lock bar tension, won't affect the opening, and that's a brilliant idea. You also have some nice jimping and prominence here on the lock bar. You can see the lock bar comes up a little bit above the other handle there, allowing for relatively easy unlocking, even though it is a steel frame lock, which has a little bit of a tension to it, certainly. A tension, not a tension. There is a lot of tension on this lock bar here. You have a canted clip, which kind of hangs it off to the side here. The scales are the same thickness on both sides, even though one of them is all steel and one of them is steel and aluminum. And so that gives you a symmetry that I didn't expect, certainly, and especially given that you've got full liners, which is actually quite important when you've got G10 on the other side here. So that's very nice. You can really tell, looking at this knife, that it was done by a designer who was giving a crap. A lot of the really cheapy budget knives, and especially those made by, well, I don't want to stereotype, but there are definitely companies that are making knives where it feels like their $30 knives were spent about 30 minutes in designing them. You know, most of the time was spent into how can we make this cheap, and very little of it was spent in how can we make this good. But this is a knife where you can very clearly tell that there was a good designer at the helm of it, where they spent a lot of time doing a lot of work, basically, to try and make sure this was as good as it could get, at least for that price point or whatever. I mean, material aside, they spent a lot of time on the design here, and that shows. And so to me, that is all the good, is that it's got some nice design details that make it feel like a designer was actually giving a crap, which is definitely a nice thing. It's decently made for 35 bucks. It is 35 bucks. It flicks quite well, especially if you're not underneath a camera, and you give it a little bit of wrist, oh my god, and then it has a decent clip and a nice blade. On the great side, to me, the ergonomics of this are great. I have smaller hands than most. Ergonomics are a little subjective, but man, I grab this guy and it just locks into my hand. The clip doesn't interfere, and the clip is wide enough up here that it actually provides another area, it provides a little bit more palm swell here. And so I can choke back here, and it works great. I can choke up here, it works great. This knife just really works pretty well in my hand. And it flicks well, and the flicking hole is well positioned here. So you can get it with the index finger or the middle finger, depending on how you want to work with things. But it's really well done for the hand. This comes back to the design, but more specifically, this is a design that it works great in actual everyday practical use. Between the blade shape and the ergonomics, that's a really nice thing. So to me, at least, that's what's great, is the ergonomic design is really on point. On the bad side, to start with, this is a little bit big. And more specifically, it's right over that legal line. It always frustrates me when companies make knives that are 3.56 inches. All that the difference here, this additional, half a freaking millimeter, yeah, I know I mixed units, but I long for units that make sense. But anyways, that additional little bit, all that's going to do is get you arrested. There is literally nothing that extra little bit of blade will do aside from be a felony in 3.5-inch law states. That doesn't make any sense. But moreover, I actually feel like this knife is a little big generally. Because it's big, it's very heavy, and as a result, I just kind of feel like I hope there's a mini one of these guys in the works. I think that would be even more compelling if the original design intent and the ergonomics can be, done well, and ideally they can bump the materials a little bit. Yeah, that would be a very nice thing. Next thing, the scale fit on these guys isn't super impressive. If we look at these two, this one, the G10, is actually a little bit better done in that way, but there are a couple of places where you'll see that either the scales are a little bit further back than the line or a little further forward. On the aluminum one, it's a little bit problematic. You can see here the scale is hanging out a good bit over here. Similarly, the scale is hanging out a little bit over here. I mean, there's not a lot of effort put towards fitment. $30. Okay, not a big deal, but it is something to point out. Another thing that you probably just heard is the lock stick. And it's weirdly variable on these. I sort of expect that once I get these guys apart, and I will probably try and do that later on, but I wanted to do the review before I attempted to get them apart, just in case that ended up being a destructive process, so to speak. I suspect it will smooth out a little bit further, and I will be able to work on that lock stick a little bit, but right now, running as it is, there is actually some intermittent stick, actually on both of them. It's like if they are open with enough force, there becomes a little bit of stick, but not always. It's like the first one of the day. There's something lock sticky going on there that's a little frustrating, and I'd like to see them work on. For $30, okay, whatever. Not a huge deal, but it's something to keep in mind. Next thing, this is heavy. It is a steel frame lock, and as such, it's freaking heavy. We are looking here at 5.6 ounces for a 3.5-inch blade. Right here in the G10, we're looking at 5.39 ounces. Yeah, it's a slight difference, but it's not a big difference. Slight, not big. Yeah, those mean the same. Anyways, I digress. As a result, these guys are freaking heavy. And they are definitely something you're going to feel in your pocket every damn day. It's a nice design, but and I don't expect titanium for $35. No way in heck, no. However, that is a big compromise you're making. Anytime you go to a frame lock, at those low price points, you end up with steel, and when you end up with a steel frame lock, you end up with a heavy knife, and that's not super amazing. And there's not like any internal milling or anything, but again, $35. I have to keep shouting at myself. It's freaking heavy. Next thing, the aluminum one, I'll say, doesn't actually impress me as much, partly because the aluminum itself is a little bit slippery. There are elements of this, and particularly if you're in this finger choil, your hand isn't really going anywhere. But this is definitely a little bit of a slippery surface, and you can also see that it's taking dings very effectively. Even from relatively minimal carry, this aluminum here takes dings, and because it's just painted, here it seems like that paint comes off very readily. Any kind of assault, so to speak, will leave little dings, will leave little scratches, etc. That's not really a great thing. Holy crap, that time it stuck like crazy. Either way, there is definitely... See, that's the thing, it's variable, because right now... Oh, now it's sticking again. I don't freaking know. But either way, what did I just do? Suddenly it's way worse. Anyways, just chalk that one up on the bad, and if it keeps going like this now, it's going to be ugly. Maybe something got out of alignment there? Now I'm confused, mid-review, because it wasn't lock sticking that bad 5 minutes ago. What the heck, guys? What the heck? Oh, okay, now it went away. Guys, these are the kinds of things we're dealing with here. But anyway, so the aluminum on it, now we're back to normal. Maybe there's something. I freaking don't know. So the aluminum, though, shows some dings and wear and is a little bit slippery. It is heavy. It has a good bit of lock stick that is very weird, particularly on this aluminum one here. And the scale fit isn't impressive. And honestly, the knife is a little bigger than I think it needs to be. On the ugly front, a couple of issues. To start with, this weird phantom lock stick thing that actually is not... Why is this suddenly variable? Maybe there's some substance or another on the lock face that's... I don't know. Either way, wow. But this one's good to go. Look, I don't freaking know. So that's not great. Whatever the heck is causing this amount of variability in the aluminum one, that's not great, whatever it is. Next thing, they are thread locked shut. I tried to do a disassembly video, and I called it, because these are relatively shallow screws here. You can see here, there's that little bit of drilling in there. And they are thread locked deeply shut. And so as a result, yeah, I'm going to try and do a video where I disassemble these guys, but I'm not super hopeful about it. And part of that is because some of the screws are actually already looking stripped out. So like this screw right here has already started to strip. You can tell that at the factory, those fasteners started to strip out. And that's not promising, because that means that when I start trying to do this, I'm probably going to end up in the same boat. So I'm not a big fan of that. The fact that it's thread locked shut is ugly enough, but if the screws are stripping from the factory, that's extra not so good. And so that's not great. And then finally on the ugly front, the blade steel on this is 7CR17 MOV. So that steel, basically, it's as if somebody took 8CR13 MOV, or ROS 8, and said, how can we make this cheaper and lower quality? I mean, I don't want to get too deep into steel, and if you find sharpening on a very regular basis, then okay, whatever, I guess. But guys, no. I mean, at some level, this is going the exact opposite direction of where the budget knife market needs to go. 8CR13 or ROS 8 are kind of, that's the bottom of the barrel, guys, and you're going even deeper. You hit the bottom of the barrel and you started digging. Part of me is a little bit disappointed. At one point in time in my, because, I try my best not to do that much research during my initial review period. And, I hadn't done much carrying yet, but I just done a bunch of handling, and I was thinking these were D2, and that was really impressing me. But no, for some reason they are not. So that's just not a really impressive steel to me, and I hope they're able to move on to something a little bit better. This is the area where this knife is weakest. They have taken the blade, and the blade is the thing that is most important about a knife, remember, because that's the thing that does the work that the knife is supposed to do, and they made it out of a very, very unimpressive steel. And so I really think that they should consider trying to upgrade the steel in these guys. Even if it ends up moving this to being a $40 knife, this guy for $40 in D2 would be great. Absolutely. I would be very, very, well, okay, there would still be some other issues, but nevertheless, this guy for $40 in D2 would be actually something I could recommend to somebody. Right now, as it stands, this is something I would only recommend to somebody who really, really likes sharpening and hopes to do it a great deal in their life. So, to me at least, all that is the uglies. That 7CR17 MOV is just, no, you need to do better than that. One of the screws is partially stripped already, and the knives are thread locked shut, and it's got this weird lock stick thing that keeps going back and forth. But hopefully that's something that would go away with a cleaning, which I would do if the thing wasn't thread locked shut. I digress. So, final conclusion. This is actually a very nice design. This is a reminder to me that in some ways I would much rather have a good design done cheaply than a bad design done expensively. And I've definitely had both of those things on the channel. I have had designs that were really, really, really tragically bad. Designs where it was just like, this is $300, but it's awful. Like, this never should have left the factory at any price point. And those are uncarryable. They're unusable knives. This is the opposite. This is a very good design, but it's just they dropped the ball in a couple of areas, more specifically the steel area. But you can tell it's still a great design. It's reasonably made. It's got a nice blade shape. It's got some very nice design details. The ergonomics on it are quite good. They're actually pretty impressive. It does have some other downsides, though. It's a little bit huge. There's a little inconsistency in the lock and this lock stick, apparently. It's a heavy beast. The aluminum one isn't really where I would send you, given the scratch-it-through and whatnot. I would just pay the extra few bucks for G10. They are thread-locked shut, and the blade is about as cheap of a steel as you can get without putting the word surgical in the name someplace. And this is really frustrating to me, because the design on this guy is good enough to make it a knife that is somewhat compelling. You know, if you can get a very nice deal on this, at some level, the design is good enough to make me think, you know what, maybe you just buy this and you learn to shop in two. And you know what, that could be okay. I feel like I am borderline willing to recommend this knife, even despite that issue. And I feel a little bad about that. And the other thing is, just because, you know, I'm a steel snob, but at the same time, the design is good. But the thing is, though, that's not going to, even if I feel conflicted, I don't think the market is going to be, because there are other brands that are using better materials. So, for instance, this is Civivi Knives. This is the Civivi Praxis. And they're using a much better steel here. They are using much better actions. They're just, frankly, very, very, very nice knives for $40. And this guy is getting to be a little bit less that way. You've got, you know, for instance, Rake, Ruwaiki over here. You've got Real Steel. You've got a whole bunch of different options out there in this kind of budget price point, and most of them are using nicer steels. This is 14C28N, a very nice budget steel. Or you're seeing a lot of D2 out there in the world. You're seeing a bunch of stuff out there that is just way improved in terms of that. And so if a company like Gerber is wanting to compete with companies like Civivi or Real Steel or the Chinese-based brands, they're going to need to be able to compete in areas like, well, steel and construction and whatnot. Design will get them very far. But if they're just racing to the bottom of the price bracket, if they're trying to make a knife as cheaply as they possibly can, the fact is, I don't think they can compete, because there's probably less overhead, etc. And if you're looking at $30 for something like this, which has a reasonable design, and actually, you know, decent enough steels, etc., versus $30 for this, I don't know that they're going to be able to do that. So in a lot of ways, I hope that they stop racing to the bottom here. I hope that they aim those prices just a little bit higher. If we were to see this guy for $40 in D2 steel, I think that would be a knife I could recommend, particularly if the lock stick thing is an aberration and maybe they switch to a thread locker that isn't awful. That could be really a nice knife, and the strength of the design could be able to shine through right here. Because, yeah, right now that's my biggest feeling, is like, this is a really nice design, but it was let down by a price point that really shouldn't have been that. You know, so, and the difference between $35 with a crappy steel and $40 with a decent steel isn't all that big, and I think long-term satisfaction will be higher if it's a knife you're not sharpening every 10 seconds. Maybe I'm being too hard on the steel. Maybe I'm being a steel snob here. Maybe this is true. And I'm sure that for many people, this would serve as a very decent everyday kind of tool, but at the same time, guys, they can do better. I mean, we're watching other companies do better, and they're going to need to do better if they're going to want to compete with these guys. So, in summary, I think the Flatiron is a very nice design. It's been done very well, and it has a great deal of potential. And I do hope that they're willing to make some improvements to the materials such that they can flat iron out those wrinkles in a future production run. So anyways, there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.